The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched as far as the eye could see. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the chamber. Some floated in the air like glowing clouds. Others stood tall like living trees with golden bark. A few looked like walking crystals that sang when they moved. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood alone at the human section. Her hands shook as she watched the final votes appear on the massive screen above. The numbers glowed red against the dark metal walls. 847 votes against Earth. Only 3 votes in favor. 12 abstentions. The vote was final. Humanity was being kicked out of the galaxy. The Speaker of the Council rose from the center platform. It was a Zephyrian, one of the crystal beings. When it spoke, its voice rang like church bells across the silent chamber. "The Council has spoken," the Speaker announced. "The species known as humans from the planet Earth are hereby banished from galactic space. All hyperspace beacons connecting their system to the galactic network will be destroyed. They will remain in isolation until they prove they can follow civilized rules." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. 50 years ago, humanity had made first contact with the galaxy. It had been the greatest day in human history. Now it was ending in the worst possible way. The charges against humanity scrolled across the screen. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. Unprovoked aggression in the Kepler conflict. Violation of the Sentient Rights Accords. Questioning the Council's authority during trade talks. The list went on and on. Sarah knew some of the charges were true. Humans had fought back when the Kepler colonies were attacked. They had refused to follow some of the Council's stranger rules. And yes, they had questioned why the Council got to make all the decisions about trade and territory. But banishment? Complete isolation from the galaxy? That seemed like punishment for a crime they had not committed. Around the chamber, different alien species nodded their approval. The gas cloud nebulites pulsed with satisfied yellow light. The tree-like sylvans rustled their branches in agreement. Even some of the newer species, ones that had joined the Council after humanity, voted to cast them out. "Ambassador Chen," the Speaker called out, "do you wish to make a final statement before the sentence is carried out?" Sarah stepped forward to the speaking platform. Her voice carried across the vast chamber through the translation systems. "Honored Council members," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "Humanity came to the stars seeking friendship and knowledge. We have made mistakes, yes, but we have also saved lives, shared our technology, and fought alongside Council forces against real threats." She paused, looking around at the alien faces watching her. Some seemed sad. Most looked relieved. "You call us too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous. But every species here has a dark history. Every civilization has made mistakes while learning to live with others. The difference is that you were given chances to grow and change. Humanity is being denied that same opportunity." The Speaker's crystal form flashed with impatience. "The decision has been made, Ambassador. Your species has shown it cannot adapt to civilized society. Then we will make our own society," Sarah said quietly, but her words carried clearly through the chamber. "If the galaxy will not accept us as we are, then we will find our own path among the stars." Several Council members shifted uncomfortably at her words. The Sylvan Elder, ancient even by her species' long-lived standards, leaned forward with interest. But the Speaker simply nodded. "So be it. Implement the banishment protocols." On the main screen, Sarah watched as the hyperspace beacons around Earth's solar system began shutting down one by one. Each beacon that went dark cut another connection between humanity and the galactic community. Within hours, Earth would be completely isolated. Sarah gathered her things and walked toward the exit. Other human diplomats and staff followed her in silence. As they reached the doors, the Sylvan Elder called out to her. "Ambassador Chen," the ancient being said in her whisper-soft voice, "I abstained from the vote. Many of us remember when our own species made similar mistakes. Perhaps the Council will reconsider in time." Sarah nodded politely, but she could see the doubt in the Elder's ancient eyes. The Council had made its decision. Humanity was on its own. The journey back to Earth took 3 days using the last hyperspace corridor that remained open. Sarah spent most of the time writing reports and sending messages to Earth's government. By the time their ship reached Sol System, news of the banishment had already spread across every human world and colony. On Earth, people gathered in the streets. Some protested and demanded their leaders fight back. Others seemed scared about what would happen next. But in the research centers and military bases, a different mood was taking hold. Dr. Marcus Torres received Sarah's final transmission from Geneva. He was in his laboratory, surrounded by equations and experimental equipment that the Council had banned as too dangerous for civilized species to pursue. Marcus smiled as he read the message. For years, his team had been forced to work within the Council's strict rules about scientific research. No experiments with dimensional physics, no research into consciousness transfer, no weapons development beyond approved limits, no exploration of technologies the Council deemed unsafe. Now those rules no longer applied. Team meeting in 10 minutes, Marcus announced to his staff. We have work to do. Across Earth and the remaining human colonies, similar scenes were playing out. Military researchers pulled out plans that had been shelved due to Council restrictions. Engineers began designing ships that did not rely on Council-controlled hyperspace technology. Scientists started experiments that would have resulted in immediate expulsion from the galactic community, but humanity was already expelled. The Council had set them free in ways it did not yet understand. Sarah Chen arrived at the United Nations building in New York, just as the last hyperspace beacon went dark. Standing at the window of the Security Council chamber, she watched the night sky. Somewhere out there, a galaxy full of alien civilizations was continuing without them. What now? Asked General Harrison, the head of Earth's military forces. Sarah turned away from the window. Now we show them what humans can really do when nobody is telling us we can't. The Security Council meeting that followed would become known as the Geneva Accords. In a single night, humanity's leaders made decisions that would change everything. The Council's rules no longer applied to them. Earth scientists were free to pursue any research they wanted. Military forces could develop any weapons they needed, and most importantly, humanity would never again ask permission to explore the universe. In research facilities around the world, work began immediately. The theories that Dr. Torres and others had been developing in secret could finally be tested. Technologies that the Council feared could finally be built. The galaxy had voted to banish humanity because they were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to break the rules. The galaxy was about to discover it had made a terrible mistake. As Sarah Chen fell asleep that first night of Earth's isolation, she had no idea that in just 5 years, her species would return to the stars not as supplicants begging for readmission, but as something entirely new. The Council had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about following rules. Instead, they had taught humanity that sometimes the best response to unjust rules is to write your own. 5 years had passed since the galaxy went silent. On the Council worlds, life continued much as it always had. The Zephyrian Collective expanded their trade routes into the space where human colonies used to be. They found the settlements empty but intact, as if the humans had simply vanished overnight. The buildings were clean, the equipment was working, but there were no people anywhere. The crystal beings took over the facilities and added them to their growing empire. Most Council members had forgotten about the banished humans entirely. After all, 5 years was barely a moment in the lifespans of species like the Sylvans who could live for thousands of years. On the rare occasions when someone mentioned Earth, the conversation was brief. What could a single species accomplish alone in the darkness between stars? Without access to galactic technology and trade, the humans would probably spend decades just trying to survive. They were wrong. Dr. Marcus Torres stood in what used to be the Geneva Research Facility. Now it was something entirely different. The building stretched both up into the sky and down deep underground. More importantly, parts of it existed in dimensions that most species could not even see. Status report, Marcus said to his team. Around him, holographic displays showed data from experiments that would have given Council scientists nightmares. Dimensional fold technology is stable, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, his lead physicist. We can now create spaces that exist partially outside normal reality. The applications are... She paused, struggling to find words. Well, they're game-changing, Marcus nodded. When humanity had been cut off from Council oversight, his team had immediately begun testing theories that had been strictly forbidden. The Council claimed such research was too dangerous, that it could destabilize space itself. They were right about the danger, but wrong about humanity's ability to control it. Consciousness transfer protocols? Marcus asked. Working perfectly, answered Dr. James Park. We can now back up and restore human minds with complete accuracy. Death is becoming optional. And the big project? Sarah Kim smiled. ready for testing. We've built drives that don't need hyperspace gates or beacons. They don't use hyperspace at all. Marcus felt a chill of excitement. The Council controlled the galaxy by controlling access to hyperspace travel. Every civilization depended on the network of gates and beacons that the Council maintained. Without that network, interstellar travel took thousands of years, but humanity had found another way. Meanwhile, in orbit around Earth, Ambassador Sarah Chen floated inside a ship that should not have been possible. The bridge existed in normal space, but the weapon systems phased in and out of reality. The engines drew power from sources that Council science claimed did not exist. Status of the fleet? She asked. Captain Rodriguez, formerly of Earth's Space Navy, checked his displays. All 72 ships are ready, Ambassador. The crews have completed training on the new systems. Sarah nodded. Each ship in the new Human Stellar Initiative fleet was a masterpiece of technologies that the Council had banned. They could phase between dimensions to avoid weapons fire. They could travel faster than anything in the Galactic fleet. Most importantly, they could go anywhere without using the Council's hyperspace network. Any word from our scout teams? They've been monitoring Council space for 6 months now, Rodriguez reported. The aliens have no idea we're there. Our ships are effectively invisible to their sensors. This was the key to humanity's new capabilities. During their exile, human scientists had not just developed new technologies. They had developed technologies that worked completely differently from anything the Council understood. Council sensors could not detect ships that phased between dimensions. Council weapons could not hit targets that existed partially outside normal space. Back on Earth, the changes were visible everywhere. Cities now included buildings that folded space to fit more rooms inside than should have been possible. Factories produced materials by manipulating matter at the quantum level. Medical centers could heal injuries that would have been fatal just years before. But the most important changes were philosophical. The Council was right about one thing. Sarah Chen said during a meeting of Earth's leadership, "Humans are different from other species." But they were wrong about that being a weakness. General Harrison, now in charge of the HSI military forces, nodded in agreement. Every other species seems to accept their limitations. When the Council says something is impossible or too dangerous, they just accept it. Humans ask why. More than that, added Dr. Torres, joining the meeting via hologram from his laboratory. Humans don't just question rules. We're willing to break them if they don't make sense. The Council calls that dangerous. I call it adaptable. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent signal from the outer system. One of the new monitoring stations had detected something interesting. "What is it?" Sarah asked. The technician's voice was excited. "Ma'am, we're picking up a Council exploration vessel near the Kuiper Belt. It's detecting some kind of energy signature." Sarah, Marcus, and Harrison exchanged glances. They had been careful to keep their new technologies hidden. But with so many experiments running, it was possible something had leaked into normal space. "What kind of energy signature?" Marcus asked. "Unknown to Council science, sir. Their computers are calling it an instrument error." Marcus smiled. "Of course they are. Their instruments were never designed to detect dimensional manipulation." The Council vessel spent 3 days trying to figure out what it was detecting. Finally, it gave up and labeled the readings as equipment malfunction. The ship left the solar system without ever realizing it had discovered evidence of technologies that should not exist. "That was too close," General Harrison said. "If they start investigating more seriously—" "They won't," Sarah interrupted. "Council species don't investigate things their science says are impossible. That's their greatest weakness." She was right. Over the next few months, Council vessels detected dozens of anomalous readings from the direction of the former human territories. Each time they explained the readings away as equipment problems or natural phenomena. The idea that the banished humans might be developing advanced technology simply did not occur to them. After all, humanity had been cut off from galactic knowledge and resources. They were probably still struggling to maintain basic spaceflight. The Council's own scientists had calculated that it would take humans at least 50 years to develop anything beyond primitive chemical rockets. The calculations were based on how other species had developed after being isolated. What the Council did not understand was that no species had ever been isolated quite like humanity. Other civilizations accepted their limitations and worked slowly within established rules. Humans threw out the rules entirely. The preliminary reconnaissance is complete. Captain Rodriguez reported to the HSI leadership 6 months later. We have detailed intelligence on Council fleet positions, technology levels, and communication protocols. They have no idea we've been watching them. Sarah Chen studied the reports. Humanity now knew more about current galactic affairs than most Council members. Their invisible scout ships had mapped military installations, recorded diplomatic communications, and analyzed technological capabilities across dozens of star systems. "Recommendations?" she asked. "We're ready," General Harrison said simply. "Our technology is decades ahead of theirs in every category that matters. Our ships are faster, tougher, and effectively undetectable. Our weapons can disable their fleets without causing casualties. And more importantly," Dr. Torres added, "we've solved problems they don't even know exist yet. Aging, disease, resource scarcity, even death itself. Humanity has become something the galaxy has never seen before." Sarah looked out at Earth below. 5 years ago, it had been a world cut off from the galaxy, struggling to find its place among ancient civilizations. Now it was the center of a growing empire built on principles that the Council could not understand. "Then it's time to reintroduce ourselves," she said, "but not as the species they banished. As what we've become." The orders went out immediately. Across human space, the new fleet began preparing for humanity's return to the galaxy. But this would not be a return as refugees seeking readmission. This would be a return as something entirely new. The Council had banished humanity for being too dangerous and unpredictable. They were about to discover just how right they had been and just how wrong they had been to think that was a bad thing. The annual assembly of the Galactic Council was always a grand affair. Representatives from 862 different species gathered on the neutral world of Concordia to discuss trade, territorial disputes, and the endless bureaucracy of managing a galactic civilization. This year's assembly was proceeding normally. The Zephyrian speaker was reviewing trade route adjustments. Several Nebulite ambassadors were debating mining rights in the Outer Rim. The ancient Sylvan elder dozed peacefully in her corner, having heard similar discussions for over 3,000 years. Then reality folded in on itself, and the HSI Defiance materialized in the center of the assembly hall. The ship appeared without warning, without sound, and without using any technology the Council understood. One moment the space above the speaking platform was empty. The next moment a massive vessel hung there as if it had always existed. Panic erupted across the assembly. Alarms began blaring. Security forces rushed toward the platform. Several species screamed in their native languages. The Nebulite ambassadors immediately began shifting toward their emergency forms, but the ship made no aggressive moves. It simply existed, hanging silently in the air like a physical challenge to everything the Council thought they knew about science and technology. The Zephyrian speaker tried to restore order. "Unknown vessel. You are in violation of Council space. Identify yourself immediately." The ship's response came not through communication channels, but through speakers that materialized from thin air around the assembly hall. The voice that spoke was calm, confident, and unmistakably human. "Honored Council members, I am Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Human Stellar Initiative. 5 years ago, you voted to banish Earth from galactic civilization. Today, we return to announce that humanity has accepted your decision." The speaker's crystal form flashed with confusion and anger. "Impossible. The hyperspace beacons to your system were destroyed. No ship can travel interstellar distances without the gate network." Sarah's voice continued, filled with polite amusement. "You are correct, Speaker. No ship can travel those distances using Council technology. Fortunately, humanity is no longer limited to Council technology." On the platform, the Sylvan Elder had awakened and was staring at the human ship with ancient eyes full of wonder and growing concern. She had lived long enough to see many impossible things become possible, but this was beyond even her vast experience. "How?" the Elder whispered, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent assembly hall. The answer came as more ships began materializing around the hall. Not just one or two, but dozens of human vessels, each appearing without warning in spaces that had been empty moments before. They surrounded the assembly in a perfect sphere, their hulls gleaming with materials that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. "The Council banished us for being too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to ignore the rules," Sarah's voice explained. "You were right. We are all of those things, but you made one critical error in your calculations." The speaker was frantically trying to contact Council defense forces, but the communication systems seemed to be experiencing technical difficulties. What error? He demanded. You assumed those qualities were weaknesses. For humanity, they are our greatest strengths. Around the assembly hall, holographic displays began appearing in the air. They showed technical diagrams of technologies that should not exist, ships that could phase between dimensions, weapons that manipulated gravity itself, energy sources that drew power from the quantum foam of spacetime. Impossible, breathed Dr. Kethvar, the Council's chief science advisor. These technologies violate fundamental laws of physics. They violate your understanding of physics, Sarah corrected gently. During our isolation, humanity discovered that many of the fundamental laws the Council accepts are actually just limitations you have imposed on yourselves. The demonstration continued. Human ships began displaying capabilities that made the assembled Council members gasp with disbelief. They phased in and out of visible reality. They moved through solid matter as if it was not there. Some ships seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. The Council controlled the galaxy by controlling access to hyperspace travel, Sarah explained. But hyperspace is not the only way to move between stars. In fact, it is not even the best way. To prove her point, one of the human ships simply vanished and reappeared on the other side of the planet. The entire journey, which should have taken hours even at light speed, happened instantly. The assembly erupted in chaos again. Species that had been allies for centuries began arguing about what this meant for their territorial agreements. Military commanders demanded immediate action against the human fleet. Scientists begged for access to the impossible technologies they were witnessing. But through it all, the human ships remained peaceful. They made no threats, fired no weapons, and took no aggressive actions. They simply existed as proof that everything the Council thought they knew about the galaxy was wrong. What do you want? The Zephyrian speaker finally demanded, his crystal form dim with confusion and fear. To offer you a choice, Sarah replied. 5 years ago, the Council voted to exclude humanity from galactic civilization. Today, humanity offers the Council a chance to join human civilization. The words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Several ambassadors collapsed. Others began speaking in rapid, panicked conversations with their home governments. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted so dramatically that many species were struggling to understand what it meant for their survival. Join you? The speaker managed to ask. The Council rules through control and limitation, Sarah explained. Humanity leads through innovation and possibility. We offer every species in this assembly access to technologies that will transform your civilizations, medical advances that can extend any lifespan indefinitely, energy sources that will eliminate scarcity, transportation that will make the hyperspace network obsolete. The holographic displays changed, showing the results of human medical technology. Diseases that had plagued various species for millennia could be cured in hours. Aging itself could be stopped or reversed. Even death was becoming a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent ending. The price? Asked the Sylvan elder, her ancient voice heavy with suspicion. No price, Sarah answered. Only a choice. Continue following the Council's rules of limitation and control, or embrace humanity's principles of innovation and growth. Around the assembly, younger representatives from various species were staring at the displays with obvious excitement. The possibilities being offered were beyond anything their civilizations had ever imagined. But the older ambassadors and those in positions of power looked terrified. This is madness, declared Commander Vex 9 of the Hegemony military forces. These technologies are too dangerous. They could destabilize the entire galaxy. Yes, Sarah agreed calmly. They could. That is why the Council must choose carefully. Will you work with humanity to explore these possibilities safely? Or will you force us to explore them alone? The threat was subtle but clear. Humanity had developed technologies that made Council military forces obsolete. They could now travel anywhere in the galaxy instantly and invisibly. They could survive anything the Council might throw at them. And they were offering to share these advances peacefully. But if the Council chose war instead of cooperation, humanity was clearly prepared for that possibility as well. Impossible, the speaker repeated, but his voice was weaker now. No species can advance so far in such a short time. Most species cannot, Sarah acknowledged. Most species accept limitations as permanent facts. Humans treat limitations as temporary problems to be solved. The demonstration was reaching its climax. Around the assembly hall, the human ships began linking together in complex patterns. Energy flowed between them in streams of light that hurt to look at directly. Reality itself seemed to bend and flex around the combined fleet. "This assembly has 10 standard days to consider our offer," Sarah announced. "We will remain in Concordia space until then. Any species that wishes to learn more about our technologies is welcome to send representatives to our ships." "And if we refuse your offer?" the speaker asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. "Then humanity will continue on our own path," Sarah replied. "The galaxy is large enough for both of our approaches to civilization. But remember, honored speaker, 5 years ago, you banished us for being too dangerous to remain part of your galactic community." The human ships began to fade from visibility, not leaving but simply becoming harder and harder to see, until they existed more as ideas than as physical objects. "Today, we return to inform you that you were right. We are too dangerous to remain part of your civilization. The question now is whether your civilization is ready to become part of ours." The last traces of the human fleet disappeared from normal vision, but every being in the assembly could still feel their presence. Somewhere just beyond perception, dozens of impossible ships waited for the Council's decision. The galaxy would never be the same. The 10 days that followed would reshape galactic history. In the first 24 hours after humanity's dramatic return, chaos spread across Council space. Emergency sessions were called on dozens of worlds. Military fleets mobilized toward Concordia, only to discover that their fastest ships would take weeks to arrive. Meanwhile, the human vessels could apparently travel anywhere in the galaxy instantly. But humanity made no aggressive moves. Instead, they did something far more unsettling. They began demonstrating their technologies to anyone willing to watch. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the HSI Defiance, looking out at the growing crowd of alien vessels surrounding their position. In just 3 days, representatives from over 200 species had arrived to see humanity's impossible achievements for themselves. "Status report," she requested. Dr. Marcus Torres appeared beside her, his image projected from laboratories that existed simultaneously on Earth and in several other dimensions. "Better than we hoped," he said with a smile. 17 species have already requested formal technology exchanges. Another 43 are in preliminary discussions. And the Council leadership? Panicking, Marcus replied honestly. They're realizing that everything they thought they knew about controlling galactic civilization is now obsolete. Sarah nodded. The demonstrations had been carefully planned to showcase humanity's most impressive but least threatening capabilities. Medical nanobots that could repair any injury or cure any disease. Terraforming technology that could transform dead worlds into gardens in months rather than centuries. Communication systems that worked instantly, across any distance without relying on the Council's controlled networks. Each demonstration drove home the same message: the old ways of doing things were no longer necessary. "Zephyrian speaker has requested a private meeting," reported Captain Rodriguez. "He's concerned about the implications for galactic stability," Sarah smiled. "I'm sure he is. His entire species' power comes from controlling trade routes through the hyperspace network. Our dimensional drives make that network irrelevant." The meeting took place on a neutral station orbiting Concordia. The Zephyrian speaker arrived with a full security detail and enough diplomatic protocol to govern a small war. Sarah came alone, traveling in a small craft that materialized directly in the station's docking bay without using any recognizable propulsion system. "Ambassador Chen," the speaker said formally, his crystal form reflecting the station's lights and nervous patterns. "We need to discuss the implications of your return." "Of course," Sarah replied, settling into a chair that adjusted itself automatically to human anatomy. "What would you like to know? How is any of this possible?" The speaker asked bluntly. "Our best scientists have reviewed your demonstrations. According to everything we understand about physics, your technologies should not work. They work because we stopped accepting should not as a permanent answer," Sarah explained. "The Council has spent thousands of years perfecting technologies based on specific understandings of how the universe works. Humanity spent 5 years discovering that those understandings were incomplete." She gestured, and holographic displays appeared in the air between them. The images showed the progression of human scientific development over the past 5 years. Each breakthrough had led to new questions, new experiments, and new impossibilities becoming possible. "Take your hyperspace network," Sarah continued. It's an elegant solution to the problem of interstellar travel, but it requires massive infrastructure, central control, and acceptance of significant limitations on where and when ships can travel. Has served galactic civilization for millennia, the speaker protested, and it could continue to serve for millennia more, Sarah agreed. But why limit yourself to one option when better alternatives exist? The holographic display showed human dimensional drives in action. Unlike hyperspace travel, which required specific entry and exit points, dimensional technology allowed ships to move between any 2 points in normal space instantly. The implications, the speaker began, then stopped as he realized what he was about to say. The implications are that control of galactic travel is no longer possible, Sarah finished for him. No one can charge fees for access. No one can deny passage to ships they disapprove of. No one can use transportation bottlenecks to control trade or territory. The speaker's crystal form dimmed with understanding. You're not just offering us new technology. You're dismantling the entire structure of galactic civilization. We're offering you a better structure, Sarah corrected. One based on abundance rather than scarcity. One based on cooperation rather than control. Over the following days, similar conversations took place with representatives from dozens of species. The younger civilizations, those that had joined the council more recently, were generally excited by humanity's offer. They had less invested in the old system and more to gain from new possibilities. The older species, particularly those in positions of power, were far more resistant. This is chaos, declared Commander Vex 9 during a heated session of the Emergency Council Assembly. These humans are offering technologies that could destroy the balance we have maintained for thousands of years. What balance? Asked Representative Calatri of the Centauri Union, one of the newer council members. You mean the balance where the oldest species control all the resources and the newest species fight over scraps? The assembly erupted in arguments that revealed deep divisions that had existed for centuries, but had never been openly discussed. Species that had joined the council in the last few hundred years began voicing complaints about trade restrictions, territorial limits, and technological embargoes that the older civilizations had imposed. The humans are exploiting our differences, the Sylvan elder observed sadly. They're turning us against each other. No, replied Dr. Yenna Keth, the young hegemony scientist who had been studying human technology demonstrations. They're revealing differences that already existed. The question is whether we're wise enough to address them. Meanwhile, humanity continued their demonstrations with systematic precision. Each day brought new revelations that challenged council assumptions about what was possible. They showed how consciousness could be backed up and restored, making death optional rather than inevitable. They demonstrated manufacturing techniques that could create any material from basic elements, eliminating resource scarcity. They revealed energy sources that could power entire civilizations without environmental damage. But perhaps most revolutionary was their approach to scientific research itself. Your species follows strict protocols. Dr. Torres explained to a group of council scientists who had requested a private briefing. You test hypotheses carefully, build consensus before proceeding, and avoid research that your authorities deem dangerous. As any responsible civilization should, replied Dr. Kethvar, the council's chief science advisor. And that approach works well for stable, incremental progress, Torres acknowledged. But it also prevents the kind of breakthrough discoveries that lead to revolutionary advances. The human scientist gestured, and holographic displays showed the development of dimensional technology. This breakthrough came from an experiment that council protocols would have forbidden. It required testing theories that could have destabilized local spacetime. The potential consequences were enormous. Then why did you proceed? Asked Dr. Yenaketh. Because the potential benefits were also enormous, Torres replied simply. Humanity doesn't avoid risk. We manage it. The demonstrations continued for 7 more days. By the end of the period, the galaxy had been divided into 3 groups. Species that wanted to join humanity's new paradigm, species that wanted to maintain the old council system, and species that were still trying to decide. The formal vote will be tomorrow, Captain Rodriguez reported to Sarah. Intelligence suggests it will be close. Sarah nodded. She had expected this. Change was always difficult, especially for civilizations that had maintained the same systems for thousands of years. Recommendations if they vote against us? She asked. We proceed alone, General Harrison replied simply. We have more than enough interested species to form a new alliance. The old council can maintain their traditional systems while we build something better. And if they vote for war? Harrison's expression was grim but confident. Our ships are centuries ahead of theirs technologically. We could disable their entire military without causing a single casualty. But I don't think it will come to that. Why not? Because some of their own people are starting to realize what we're really offering, Harrison explained. We're not just sharing technology. We're sharing a completely different way of thinking about what civilization can be. The final day of deliberations arrived. In the Great Assembly Hall, representatives from nearly 1,000 species gathered to make a decision that would determine the future of galactic civilization. The debate was fierce and emotional. Ancient alliances were strained to the breaking point. New coalitions formed around shared visions of the future. When the vote was finally called, the result was closer than anyone had expected. 412 species voted to accept humanity's offer of a new paradigm. 398 voted to maintain the old council system. 52 abstained. The galaxy would split, but not through war. Half would embrace humanity's vision of unlimited possibility. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The traditional council military forces prepared for massive fleet battles, orbital bombardments, and the grinding campaigns that had characterized galactic conflicts for millennia. They assembled armadas of thousands of ships, mobilized planetary defense networks, and activated ancient weapon systems that had been stored since the last Great War. Humanity responded with something completely unexpected. They refused to fight. Admiral, the human fleet is approaching our defensive perimeter, reported the tactical officer aboard the Zephyrian command ship Crystal Harmony. Should we open fire? Admiral Kethzar studied his tactical displays with growing confusion. The human ships were advancing directly toward his battle line, but they showed no signs of aggressive intent. No weapons were powered, no shields were raised. They simply moved forward as if his fleet did not exist. Open a communication channel, he ordered. Ambassador Sarah Chen's image appeared on the main screen. She was sitting calmly in what appeared to be a garden rather than a military command center. Admiral Kethzar, she said politely, I understand you have orders to prevent human ships from entering this system. That is correct, the Admiral replied stiffly. Turn back immediately or we will fire. I'm afraid we cannot do that, Sarah said with genuine regret. We have received a distress call from the planet below. Our medical teams are responding to a planetary emergency. Kethzar's confusion deepened. What emergency? Our sensors show no problems on Sylvanos Prime. Check again, Sarah suggested gently. The Admiral's science officer ran new scans of the Sylvan homeworld below. His voice was puzzled when he reported, Sir, we're detecting some kind of biological contamination spreading through the planet's vegetation networks. It appears to be a plague of some kind. Kethzar felt a chill run through his crystalline form. The Sylvans were plant-based life forms. A plague that attacked vegetation could kill billions of them within days. How did you detect this before our sensors? He demanded. Our medical technology is more advanced, Sarah replied simply. Admiral, my ships contain the cure for this plague. We can have it distributed across the entire planet within 6 hours. But our medical teams need to reach the surface immediately. The Admiral faced an impossible choice. His orders were to prevent human ships from entering the system. But if he followed those orders, an entire planet would die. This could be a trick, he said desperately. It could be, Sarah agreed. But can you afford to take that chance? Check with the Sylvan planetary government. Ask them if they're willing to risk the lives of their entire species to maintain a military blockade. The communication that followed was brief. The ancient Sylvan elder, her voice weak with the first stages of infection, personally authorized the human medical mission. Admiral Kethzar found himself ordering his ships to stand down while human vessels passed through his battle line unopposed. The human medical response was extraordinary. Ships that could phase between dimensions materialized directly in the planet's atmosphere. Medical nanobots were released into the air and water systems. Within hours, the plague was not just stopped but completely eliminated from the planetary ecosystem. But the most shocking part came when the human ships prepared to leave. Instead of departing immediately, They left behind medical stations that would continue monitoring Sylvan health indefinitely. They also shared the complete genetic analysis of the plague, along with treatments for dozens of other diseases that Sylvan science had not yet discovered. Why? Admiral Kethzar asked when Sarah contacted him before departing. Because that's what civilized beings do for each other, she replied simply. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Council military forces would mobilize to stop human advances, only to discover that humanity was not advancing militarily at all. They were responding to disasters, preventing conflicts, and solving problems that the Council's own forces could not handle. When the hegemony battle fleet moved to protect their mining colonies, they found human ships already there, quietly containing a massive solar flare that would have sterilized 3 worlds. When Nebulite forces prepared to defend their exploration vessels, they discovered that human ships were escorting those same vessels safely through a dangerous asteroid field that had been unstable for decades. Most frustrating of all, humanity's actions were making their own military responses look petty and small-minded. They're not fighting us, General Harrison explained to the emergency session of human leadership. They're making us irrelevant. How so? Asked Sarah Chen. Every time they mobilize to stop us, we solve a problem they couldn't solve themselves. Every time they try to make us look like aggressors, we end up looking like rescuers. Their own people are starting to question why they're fighting us at all. The breaking point came 3 months into the conflict. A massive earthquake struck the Zephyrian homeworld, causing crystal formations that had stood for millions of years to shatter and collapse. Millions of crystal beings were trapped in the ruins, slowly dying as their life-supporting mineral matrices were destroyed. Council rescue forces were overwhelmed. Traditional excavation techniques were too slow and too dangerous. It would take months to reach all the survivors, and most would die before then. Humanity's response was immediate and unprecedented. Ships materialized directly inside the collapsed crystal formations, existing in dimensional phases that allowed them to pass through solid matter without disturbing it. Rescue teams used consciousness transfer technology to extract dying crystal beings from their shattered bodies and place them into temporary artificial matrices until new ones could be grown. In 3 days, humanity saved more Zephyrian lives than the Council's own forces could have saved in 3 years. The Zephyrian speaker, his own crystal form cracked from the earthquake, found himself standing before a human medical station where his injured people were being treated with technologies that should not exist. "Why are you helping us?" he asked Ambassador Chen. "We voted to banish you. We mobilized fleets to fight you. Our people called you monsters and barbarians." Sarah looked around at the makeshift hospital where human medics worked alongside Zephyrian healers to save lives that should have been lost. "Because that's what neighbors do," she said simply. "They help each other when times are hard." "But we're not neighbors," the speaker protested. "We're enemies, are we?" Sarah asked gently. "You're crystal beings who think in patterns of light and resonance. We're carbon-based beings who think in patterns of chemistry and electricity. But we both value life. We both love our families. We both want our children to live in a better universe." She gestured toward a young Zephyrian who was being fitted with a new crystal matrix grown from human medical nanobots. "That child will live because 2 different species chose to work together instead of fighting." "How does that make us enemies?" The speaker watched his people being saved by beings he had been taught to fear. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. "Nothing," Sarah replied. "We want to give you something. A choice." "And what choice?" "The choice to stop seeing the universe as a place where different species must compete for limited resources. The choice to start seeing it as a place where different species can cooperate to create unlimited possibilities." The formal end of the conflict came not through surrender or peace treaties, but through a simple announcement from the Sylvan Elder. Speaking for the first time since her near death from the plague that humans had cured, her ancient voice carried across the galaxy. "The Council hereby dissolves its military opposition to humanity," she declared. "We have learned that fear makes poor decisions. Wisdom suggests we should learn from these beings rather than fight them." One by one, other species followed suit, not because they were defeated, but because they had seen what cooperation could accomplish. The new galactic forum that replaced the old council chambers was built on principles that humanity had suggested. No central hierarchy, no permanent seats for the most powerful species, No veto powers for ancient civilizations. Instead, decisions were made by collaborative consensus. Problems were solved by pooling knowledge and resources. Conflicts were resolved through innovation rather than domination. Ambassador Sarah Chen, now Secretary General of the Reformed Galactic Alliance, stood before the first session of the new forum. Around her, representatives from over 800 species sat in a perfect circle, no one elevated above anyone else. 5 years ago, she began, the old council voted to banish humanity because we were too dangerous to remain part of galactic civilization. Today, I want to thank them for that decision. Surprised murmurs rippled through the assembly. Without that banishment, humanity would never have discovered our true potential. We would have remained content to follow rules that limited our growth. We would have accepted that scarcity and competition were permanent features of civilized life. She gestured around the circular chamber, where beings that had been enemies just months before were now working together on problems that no single species could solve alone. Instead, we learned that the greatest rule of civilization is that all rules can be improved.